Thank you all for being here. My name is Marcin de Kaminski. I'm working at Sida, the Swedish International Development Corporation. I'm the policy specialist for freedom of expression ICT issues. And one of the things that we are working with a lot is technical challenges to freedom of expression and human rights. With me today, I have Pirlot de Corbion from Privacy International, which is a UK-based NGO working on issues that obviously Alex will explain further herself. How many of you have iPhones? How many of you have received spam emails or SMSs or strange ads on Facebook recently? How many of you did click on those ads or spam links? Shame on you. Alex, tell us, why is this a bad thing, or what could actually happen?
Maybe just to start with a case to illustrate some of the questions that Marcin was just asking you. In August of this year, a prominent activist and human rights defender in the UAE named Ahmed Mansour received a suspicious text message. Given his history and some of the work that he's been doing, he was very cautious not to read and open the message that was sent to him. But instead, he sent it to an organization called the Citizen Lab, which is a research center at the University of Toronto, who was able to identify that actually that text message was a tool used to infect his iPhone. And what it turned out is that this is a type of spyware that is sold by an Israeli company called the NSO. And as a result of that discovery, Apple actually issued a security update. So around the 1st of September, if you have an iPhone, you should have received a security update from Apple asking you to update your operating system. What would have happened if Ahmed had opened that text message was that whoever had sent him that text message would have had access to his device, to his contact list, to everything basically that was on his device.
So in what way would this have posed a challenge to Ahmed's work and possibly life as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, the chilling effect is well documented. When we work on surveillance, unfortunately, because of the nature of surveillance, it's often very secret. There's a lack of transparency. In this case, we're able to see what the effect would have been. Ahmed works with an amazing network of organization. He's trying to monitor what is happening to human rights defenders in that region. And what would have happened is he would have, the people he works with could have been made vulnerable. And here we're talking about journalists, human rights defenders, and others. And that could have posed a risk to the work that they're doing and also the cause they're trying to defend.
So I think this is an interesting case because obviously all of us have iPhones or similar devices. Usually when I speak to high school students, I do this kind of exercise as well, showing them what kind of digital threats or traces they are exposed to. But how do you think that this is connected? I mean, do we see the same issues? How this connected to you? Because you're based in the UK. Why are you into working with these issues in contexts far, far away?
So yes, Privacy International is based in London, but we're very fortunate that over the past decade, we've been creating and maintaining a network of privacy advocates across the world. We're currently working at any one point with around 19 organizations in 17 countries in Latin America, Northeast and South Africa, and in Asia as well. And the idea is that we're working with these activists, these civil society organizations and experts on privacy to raise awareness in their different countries as to what's happening, what the threats are, because the threats vary as well. We're facing issues at the legal level where laws are being adopted that pose a risk to privacy because of the interference with the right to privacy at that level. But we're also seeing a more practical level in terms of the impact it has on their ability to do their work, to be able to work on different issues, some more controversial issues that the government might not want them to be talking about. And so the role that we play is to support, provide expertise and resources to some extent to some of these organizations. And then Privacy International takes on the role of elevating that debate to some of the international forums. So in the last few years, we've seen an expansion in the debate. It's not always the correct debate, the right narratives that are being talked about, but there's definitely more and more people talking about this, decisions being made at the international level. We've got the UN, but also at the European level, that are then trickling down to the national level. I've talked a lot about government side, but there's obviously as well the role that the private sector plays in this. The private sector are the ones developing those technologies, selling those technologies to these different countries. And there's also an important role we play in raising awareness within that community as to the implications of how the technology is being used and for what purpose.
So, I mean, now you're discussing a case in the UAE, but it's an Israeli company. Do you think that are these companies located only in Israel, or are there other countries? For instance, is Sweden involved in this?
Yeah, so that there are companies, surveillance companies located in many countries in the world. If you're interested in finding out more, we have an incredible resource called the Surveillance Industry Index, which is the biggest database of all the surveillance companies that are operating in the world that we're aware of. It provides you information as to the type of technologies they sell. There are companies based in Europe, in the UK, in the US. There have been examples of those companies supplying technologies to different regimes in the world. So it's definitely not a case of just Israel. We're seeing this in many other contexts as well.
So you mentioned Ahmed from the beginning, and he's a human rights defender. What kind of work would you say that human rights defenders are involved in that could actually be hindered by these kinds of technologies?
I think the role of human rights defenders is evolving as well. A lot of them traditionally have been working on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion in some countries as well. But with the evolution of the privacy debates and also the advancement in technologies, we're seeing that there are other issues coming up around big data, the use of algorithms, and those are now issues that are starting to be addressed, particularly in countries, and we haven't talked about this yet, but around the data protection regimes that exist in these different countries. And so human rights defenders are now playing an increasing role in those conversations as well. A lot of our partner organizations were not privacy experts before we started working with them. They're working on digital rights or internet rights, but over time with the evolution of the debates and the issues that are emerging in their national context, they're increasingly addressing some of these as well.
I think that's interesting because, I mean, obviously Sida is also working with supporting human rights defenders, and what we see is that the same threats that human rights defenders are facing are always, or are beginning to be targeted towards journalists, for instance, as well, and also people within the LGBT communities. Mm-hmm. How would you explain kind of what kind of different threats are there towards people working with human rights issues?
I think maybe just that's a really good question. I think before going into that, I just wanted to make an important point that often the biggest threat is the one we don't see when we talk about privacy and surveillance. It's the one that we will see when it's too late. While it's happening, there's very little trace. There are no scars that you can visibly see from the onset, and often we will see the harm when it's already happened. In terms of the work of human rights defenders, and you made a good point, it's them as activists, as a community that are also being targeted by some of these surveillance programs, but also the networks they work with. And you mentioned a few topics, which in many countries, LGBTIQ issues, even issues around sexual and reproductive rights, are issues that already are very controversial. And now governments are given another tool to be able to monitor more closely some of these organizations.
So in the beginning, I asked the audience here how many had iPhones and how many have seen different kinds of strange links. Fortunately, only one person said that he was clicking those links. Shame on you. But obviously, a lot of people have seen strange links in their internets. How do you what would you have as an advice for people in terms of protecting their data, their safety, and the issues that they're working with?
I think the starting point from our perspective at Privacy International is the burden shouldn't be on the user or the consumer. So we actively work to reform and inform the drafting of legislations and policies to ensure that the powerful, your adversary as we call it, be it the government or private companies, have the necessary regulations in place to protect your privacy. When it comes to users, I think it's, if I may make a comparison, it's the same approach that citizens can take when they make choices about the clothes they wear. Do they choose a company, a brand that has ethical practices around child slavery, working conditions? Those choices you can be making about the services, the ICT services, your devices that you buy and purchase. Those choices you can be making right now as well. That you can be using Facebook, WhatsApp, but there are alternatives as well. So I think for users it's important as a starting point to inform yourself around the issues of privacy and data protection and surveillance, just as you are with other aspects of your life that influence your life choices.
And obviously, I mean, here in Sweden, there's been a lot of discussions on surveillance issues as well, the latest in the last years. Mm-hmm. What kind of pressure could we or you put on the companies? I mean, you're saying it's a consumer rights issue, mm-hmm. But you're also dealing with issues on a kind of a policy level mm-hmm. In relation to companies. How does that work, and what kind of impact does that have?
I think on the company level, as consumers, I think we sometimes forget the power that we have. We could be demanding more. We could be demanding better privacy policies, services that from the onset already protect our privacy. A lot of companies, and you know, this is not always talked about, are developing technologies that are not privacy by design, as we call it, from the onset. And we can be changing that. We could be demanding as consumers that we want to be able to access and buy devices that protect our privacy from backdoors and access by governments and other actors. And that is linked as well to the role that governments play. So within this discussion of the surveillance technologies that are sent and deployed in various countries, we can be asking as well that our governments have stricter regulations as to the type of technologies that are being sent. And again, to make a comparison, there's been a strong debate around the arms trade and what kind of arms are being sent to other countries. A similar approach should be taken for surveillance technologies.
Would you compare surveillance technologies to arms?
Sometimes. I mean, when we see the harm that can be caused, I think it's worth reflecting as to what the movement has been and the discussions that have been ongoing in that sector, and ensuring that there are better privacy, and we're talking about corporate responsibility in various industries. Why are we not talking about the human rights within the surveillance industry as well, but also more generally within the ICT industry that touches all of our lives, the devices and services that we're provided for by that industry.
So obviously, I mean, Sida is obviously a progressive institution as we are supporting you, but also, I mean, how do you see other governments? Are they understanding these sensitive issues that are quite technological as well?
It varies. So we've got governments who are seen more as allies and others more as our adversaries. We're based in the UK, and we've been challenging a new interception of communications law for the last 2 years, but it's been something that's been in the back burner for a very long time. And we're finding very challenging to engage with the government as well on those issues. And so we're seeing actually that some of our partner organizations are having more successes to engage with their governments in these different countries to share the information. And I think that's where civil society organizations play an important role, is to provide the evidence with the cases, with the impact this would have on human rights, on their communities and on their work, to the decision, the policymakers that are sitting in those parliaments and those rooms drafting those laws, to explain what would be the consequences if they're not addressed at the onset.
Because I think that's important as well to understand how the experiences that are being found on a grassroots level, so to speak, how they're actually being transferred up to the policy level. Is that something that is useful, possible? I mean, you're working with the UN as well, not only with human rights defenders on the ground.
No, it's definitely possible. I think we've never been in a better position in terms of the resources we have, the information we have. It's a challenge every day because the narratives are becoming increasingly negative, and the issue of privacy is being politicized because of the context in which we're engaging. But at the same time, we've never had this many opportunities to engage with national policymakers, industry, but also UN mechanisms. The UN plays an important role as reporting the human rights situation in different countries, and we submitted one on Sweden, if you're interested, to the Human Rights Committee on the situation and the state of affairs of privacy in Sweden. And that's something that we're going to keep doing, to play that role of providing information to inform different decision-making processes.
I would really encourage people to read that report because it's really read-worthy. A last question, and that's not for you actually, it's for the audience. So how many here had iPhones? How many here will never, ever, ever click a strange link on their iPhones? Thank you so much. And you maybe learned something here today. If you have any more questions for me or for Alex, please join us at the Sida booth, which is in the other part of this room. We're happy to give you some tips and tricks in digital safety issues, also learn more about Alex's work and the challenges that human rights defenders see all over the world. Thank you so much for being here today.